Hey, we haven't done a video in a while. Lazy mother. Enjoy this ranking video instead.
Hey guys, given the fact that we're getting Saw 10 in October 2023, I thought it would finally be a good idea to do my definitive ranking of the first 9 films in the franchise. But before I do, I just want to make it clear that despite the placement for any one of these films, I still love every entry in the series, and really, how could I not? I've seen every single one of them more times than I can count. And I've covered the franchise extensively on this and other channels. So while I am excited to write this script and then present it to you, the viewer, there is a part of me that's a little apprehensive. You see, while I'm trying to be clear-headed as possible with these rankings, I know that these are just my thoughts on the franchise, and the exact order could simply change over time. Also, it's a fact that the Saw franchise, like many popular horror series, is a brand that is still growing. The release of Saw 10 alone might put this entire ranking into question. Not to mention any other sequels, prequels, or even a TV show that might be released for the franchise sometime in the future. Yeah, I am never going to stop asking for an extended universe of Saw-related content, but the future for there doesn't really look bright at the moment. We're just gonna have to wait to see how Saw 10 does. Finally, the biggest issue I have with creating these type of lists is when people do them for series that don't have enough content to really create an originality from the top and the bottom. Like, really? You think Terminator 1 and 2 are the best in that franchise?
She's like, what I've learned after this experience is that girls get it done. I'm Sarah Connor, and I'm stunning and brave.
What's your ranking on the Alien series? I do wonder.
From her, you bitch!
Seriously, tell me again, in your personal opinion, The Godfather Part 3 is the worst in the franchise.
Come on, big fat Rick, you know your face is too small to rub anything on. My face is the same size as yours. I'll be damned. You're so fat, you're an optical illusion.
Look how they mess with my boy.
But I digress. Let's get into it. Number 9, Saw: The Final Chapter. You see what I mean here? Like, what more needs to be said about this movie? No, I don't care that Cary Elwes was unable to come back to the franchise until this point due to legal battles over the original film. I don't care that this film was supposed to be 2 before it had to be condensed into 1 after Paranormal Activity tricked a bunch of young millennials and Gen Zs that a quality horror movie could be a feature film jump video. I don't care that the producers stole Kevin Greuter from Paranormal Activity 2 and gave him less than 2 weeks to prep, when David Hackle had been prepping for over a year to make this movie. I just don't care. It's the worst movie in the entire series, and it's the only one that I consider a cynical marketing cash grab. One that went dumpster diving into fan forums for a C- ending to the series that birthed one of the most unique eras of horror in the last 40 years. And please, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of amazing stuff from the creative team that made this film, and we'll have to cover that in another list. It's just disappointing that this film couldn't have been better. Damn. Number 8, Saw 5. I'm not going to belabor this point any more than I already have. Jacob and I have already spent multiple hours discussing the inner workings of this film, as well as all of the others. If you're interested in hearing that, go listen to our retrospective series. Also, I spent 2 hours talking to David Hackle about his time working on the series before coming back to be a part of Spiral, and we discussed the reactions to Saw 5 in that interview. Honestly, I think that this film represents what is inherently wrong with the franchise. It focused too heavily on the pre-established story with no clear path forward. I understand the need to have Hoffman cover up his deeds in order to keep the status quo for future sequels, but there is no reason that needed to be the entire point of the film. Really, for me, it's just the first film in the franchise that just kind of felt unneeded. it was disposable. Something that was solely meant to take up theater space and rack up enough money to keep the machine turning for yet another year, until the creative team could figure out what point they were trying to make with this grand soap opera of horrific suffering and philosophical pondering on individual legacy. This is also the film where the police procedural element of the series took center stage, with the main focus centering on Special Agent Peter Strahm as he effortlessly parrots his way through a mystery that we, the audience, are already keenly aware of. Just absolutely riveting stuff. Look, I understand that this film was kind of a wholehearted reaction to the overly complex nature of its immediate predecessor, but in the words of series creator Lee Winnell, if you don't know what's going on at this point, that's your fault. Number 7, Spiral, from the Book of Saw. Honestly, I don't really know what else I need to say about my thoughts on this film, as I've already done multiple deep dives on its overall quality over on my other channel. You can find my review of the film on the upper right hand corner of this video. Still, I do think it's important to reiterate my main takeaway with this movie. At its core, Spiral is a decent thriller, but it's a piss poor Saw film. The inclusion of Darren Lynn Bousman might allow this film to adequately hit every major beat of a higher quality entry in the franchise, but it strips away so much of everything that made those original films worth watching that it kind of comes across as more of a by-the-numbers ripoff instead of a truly unique reimagining of the series.
Lisa and I built your room.
But I don't like this clown.
I wouldn't take it down if I were you. It's a load-bearing poster.
This might just be me, but I've always considered that the Saw fandom is less interested in the gore or horror aspects of the series and more the dramatic nonsense of it all. Movies end only for the sequels to pick up exactly where they left off. Characters are introduced and paid off only to have more relevance later, and clues are set up only to be paid off multiple films down the line. It's a bit convoluted and totally irresponsible for the continued success of a mainstream horror franchise. I mean, imagine if Friday the 13th cared about continuity as much as this film did, only to throw it all away in the 9th entry. Well, you know, what if the Friday the 13th films had a much more coherent continuity and then they did Jason Goes to Hell? By the way, you can watch my massive breakdown of the Crystal Lake series and its relevance to modern day horror in the link in the upper right hand corner. At the end of the day, the only thing I could say is that Spiral as a film isn't for everyone. I've seen a lot of people say it's one of their favorites while others have harsher opinions. I'm kind of in the middle. It isn't an embarrassing film. Its ability to stand alone makes it more of an enjoyable rewatch than the others that we've already discussed, but it certainly isn't anywhere close to my favorite in the series. Number 6, Saw. I know, I tried to warn you beforehand. Yes, the original is the most renowned in the series, arguably a stone-cold classic whose twisted narrative captured the imagination of millions of young horror fans and almost single-handedly redefined the genre of horror for over half a decade. The reverse bear trap is iconic, the twist is unforgettable, and like every other franchise that has made such an indelible mark on our collective memories, this is the one with the scene. The one that was permanently etched into the cultural consciousness, so much so that even if you haven't seen the movie, you know that scene and how it defines the series. However, as I stated at the offset, this is a subjective list. I am not here to tell you which movies are objectively better than the other. If I was, then you'd better believe that this movie would be far higher on the list. But I can say with a degree of certainty that I'm going to have to try and justify my decision here before we move on. So I guess, personally, I don't find this movie very rewatchable. Don't get me wrong, I've probably seen this one more than all of the rest. It's just when compared to the rest of the films on this list, it just doesn't hold up. Yes, this film has everything that you or I have come to expect from a Saw movie, with the traps, the flashbacks, and the brisk pace, but all of those things were refined in the later sequels. So much so that now whenever you probably think of the feel or tone of a Saw movie, your thoughts are more aligned with the work of Darren Lynn Bousman than James Wan. Furthermore, while it is true that the first movie introduced us to the world of Saw, everything that we love about the series was explored in the sequels. John Kramer isn't whimsically philosophical in the original. He's a disembodied horror villain voice. The vast majority of the traps don't factor into the overall story, they're just disjointed flashbacks within flashbacks that build up the film's tone. And the twist, while mind-blowing, is bookended with very little, if any, remaining story worth exploring after the bathroom doors are shut closed. You know what? I can keep going with this, but the short end of it is, despite its undeniable quality, the original doesn't hold up amongst the rest for what it contributes to the overall story and the characters within it. For that reason alone, I find it's one of the more difficult entries to revisit on any subsequent rewatch. And if you want any accurate barometer for how I'm ranking these movies, that's pretty much it. The original, it's a classic. My overall opinion, I'm happy that it gave us everything that came after it. Number 5, Jigsaw. I am going to get so much hell for this. Look, I've mentioned this several times across multiple videos on this channel. If you haven't watched this movie since it premiered in 2017, it's time to give it another look because I think it's better than you remember. The traps are fun, the story is fairly engaging for a later Saw sequel, and the characters are honestly the most interesting and likable that we've probably ever seen from any Saw movie to date. You kinda have to hand it to the creative team for finding a believably exciting direction for the alternate ending of Saw 3D with the introduction of Eleanor and the Jigsaw Rules website. Yes, I know the whole Logan twist doesn't sit well with a lot of fans, but the timeline maneuvering and the as of yet unheard of apprentice angle makes just about as much sense as Hoffman or Dr. Gordon if you ask me. It might have been tired with this movie, but it was tired then and we still got over it. As far as the movie goes, I really don't mind rewatching it from time to time. I'm a little disappointed that we aren't getting a direct sequel to this film, if only because it would have been nice to see the exact direction they wanted to take these characters, but the mystery of direction has always been part of the appeal of the franchise, so maybe that plays into it. I don't know. Number 4, Saw 4. Let's get this one right out of the way. I love Saw 4. I think a lot of that is mainly due to my initial viewing of the film, being surrounded by friends and discussing it for several hours in the parking lot of our local theater afterwards. Yeah, I understand why this film usually gets a lot of hate from the general audience and maybe even some fans, and it is perhaps the most blatant example of a fan-only event for the entire franchise, as Saw 4 marks the true beginning of the series' shift into serialized storytelling, with each preceding film picking up exactly where the last one left off, and with no easily recognizable time skips in between, gloriously fulfilling that ridiculous promise from series creator Lee Winnell mentioned just a few minutes ago. Oh, you don't remember this specific character, event, or location from the previous film? That's on you. Do you not care about John's past, and the mere act of exploring it takes too much away from the mystery and suspense surrounding this modern day horror icon? Well, I'm sorry, because that's the story that we want to tell right now.
And that's canon.
But unfortunately, guys, we all know that this is the type of promise and crazy direction that couldn't last forever. And we've already talked about how the series did a massive course correction in the very next installment. Still, that doesn't stop the fourth entry from being a bloody good installment into the series, and one that I found myself rewatching in earnest, even on cable reruns. Number 3, Saw 2. You remember what I said earlier?
It's just when compared to the rest of the films on this list, it just doesn't hold up. Yes, this film has everything that you or I have come to expect from a Saw movie, with the traps, the flashbacks, and the brisk pace. But all of those things are refined in the later sequels. So much so that now, whenever you probably think of the feel or tone of a Saw movie, your thoughts are more aligned with the work of Darren Lynn Bousman than James Wan. Furthermore, while it is true that the first movie introduced us to the world of Saw, everything that we love about the series was explored in the sequel.
I want you to think about this when I tell you that Saw 2 was the real birth of the franchise. The success of the first film allowed this installment to break out domestically, as it still maintains the highest domestic gross for the entire series. It's the film that solidified the franchise's dominance, and it's the film that truly introduced us to Tobin Bell's John Kramer, as it brazenly bucked the horror movie trope of not diving too deeply into the motivations and humanity of its main antagonist, at least not in the second film. It's a film that attacks the notion that you can't fool the audience a second time, especially if they're already expecting a twist, and it does it by doing 5 of them. each of which being pretty darn memorable, if admittedly not as jaw-dropping as the original. Finally, it's the movie in which every preceding film has tried to emulate from one degree to another. Kinda like how the Terminator sequels are trying to reclaim the success of Terminator 2 by kind of remaking Terminator 2 every single time. But at least the Saw movies aren't as blatantly bankrupt in their creativity.
Wait, so what is that? Is that Terminator 6?
Yeah, technically this would be the 6th Terminator film, but in actuality it's Terminator 3.
What do you mean it's Terminator 3?
Anyway, one of the reasons I am putting Saw 2 in the top 3 is because it's an enjoyable movie, and it's probably the only film in the franchise that successfully places you in the protagonist's shoes. You see, one of the best things about the original trilogy is that each of them focus on a specific conversation between two characters as the trap plays in the background. Or so you think, as the conversations are usually the bigger part of the game that's being played. If one of the biggest selling points of the Saw franchise is, would I be able to do this or that to save myself or a loved one, then the question of, could I keep cool and have a conversation with someone that is putting one of my loved ones in extraordinary danger is a fairly relatable question. Eric Matthews might be a huge asshole, but the movie effortlessly places you in his shoes by using the B storyline to ramp up tension while teasing your instinct for aggressive action over passive compliance. For that, it's definitely deserving to be within the top 3. Number 2, Saw 6. I told you that we'd be getting back to Kevin Greuter. Yeah, the people behind this franchise really did him dirty with the 7th entry, and at the time he was really vocal about it. He did come back to work on Jigsaw though, and he is returning to direct Saw 10, so maybe the 7-year hiatus really helped clear up some old wounds. But when talking about this film, or the series as a whole, it cannot be overstated just how much Greuter's work played into the long-term success of the franchise. His work in the editing of the first 5 films is what birthed the breakneck pace of the franchise, so much so that I firmly believe that it really has never been a Saw movie unless he was involved somehow. His work is just that important to the overall quality of each individual film.
Thanks to modern editing techniques, we can use existing footage to complete the film. Watch! Seamless, huh?
You're hired.
And with good cause.
One of the things I've already talked about on this list is the transition of this franchise into more of a serialized form of storytelling. For the most part, it's a transition that I found acceptable, even if Saw 4 was a little too bold for casual fans, and Saw 5 was just a little too dull to even justify its own existence. But until the premiere of the 6th entry into an aging franchise, it was still unclear exactly why the series was hinging its bets on more and more interconnected stories. In 2009, Saw 6 effortlessly crafted a story that not only hinged on plot points from the previous 2 entries, but also brought the story to a satisfying conclusion that came so close to perfection. Until...
Jill, it's a safe house. Safe house. Safe house. You get it?
Gibson, this was sent here addressed to Jill. Hoffman knows our location.
God damn it.
Yeah. All of this is really on top of how this entry still has the most socially relevant storyline of the entire series, that has only gotten more relevant as time goes on. Seriously guys, how could you have let this movie be beaten so badly by Paranormal Activity? I mean, I do kind of get it. It's the 6th movie in as many years, and literally all the other stuff that I said about this franchise focusing on fans only, I can see why people were getting bored of it. But this movie is really good. It not only deserves to be number 2 on this list, but it deserved to be a hit. Number 1. Saw 3. This is by far my favorite film in the franchise. I've already mentioned that the first 3 films primarily focus on conversations between the main characters as the traps play out in the background, usually acting as a way of building up the tension in one form or another. And while I stand by my statement that Eric Matthews is the best protagonist in the series who struggles between action and inaction in the face of overwhelming stress in a way that's easily comprehended and empathized with, I'll clarify that his journey isn't my favorite. Saw 3 takes the focus on conversation between characters and ups the ante by trying to trick you into thinking that Dr. Lynn Dinlin is suffering from the same emotionally distant nonsense that Dr. Gordon was being tested for back in the original. However, this film uses Lynn as a middleman between the psychological back and forth between John and Amanda, with Jeff's game emphasizing the need for forgiveness, the main lesson that Amanda needs to learn in order to win her game. I know a lot of people hate this movie because it represents the start of a more brutal nature that the franchise would later attempt to top with each and every single new entry, but looking into Jeff's game as a window into Amanda's journey throughout the franchise and the conversation between John, Lynn, and Amanda, you'll see a completely different movie. One that shows how the system was brutalizing Amanda. One that left her withering away in the cold after she got out of prison for a crime that she didn't commit, forcing her into a disgusting new environment and twisting the very fabric of who she was before all of this happened to her. All of this before being saved by John's teaching and being reborn with newfound purpose, until the euphoria of surviving her test dwindles away and she ends up twisting John's philosophy into her own tangled creation. And in the end, the one thing that John believes can still save her is forgiveness. Not only for him, but herself, Jeff, Lynn, Eric Matthews, and everybody else. To have her admit that it isn't the system that defines her, and that she can operate in the same emotionless capacity as John in order to carry out his legacy. Yeah, look, I know that's a crazy way to look at this film, but the point is that you can look at it in other ways and not just think of it as torture porn. These movies are great because they aren't just some teen slasher nonsense. Even if it's crazy, there's some method to the madness, and each film is deeper than almost anyone gives it credit for. Saw 3 is the best movie because it takes all the stuff that we've talked about on here and delivers a story that has a lot to say. It's a character study that explores the relationship between John and Amanda. It actively celebrates its established lore, and while not leaning as heavily on it as later films, it creates the precedent for later films to follow. It pulls no punches while trying to deliberately end the story by killing off its two main characters, not even promising an easy return to form through witchcraft or deals with the devil or anything else that horror franchises had come to be known for around that time period. It even criticizes its own philosophy, even ending on a note that suggests that the main character has finally come to terms with his own failures before his own death. I guess most important of all, I love Saw 3. I've watched it so many times now, and as I said before, rewatchability is one of the main factors on this list. So there you have it, my ranking for the entire series. Of course, this is a subjective list. If you want something that isn't so focused on my own personal enjoyment and solely based on quality for each individual film, well then I guess from worst to best,
785439162.
Hope everyone has a good day. It's been real.
So, that's the definitive ranking of all 9 Saw films. If you don't agree,